welcome and thank you for joining Interfaith Action tonight. We're so glad to have you with us. We're grateful to our co-sponsor for this event, Dwight Hall, the Center for Public Service and Social Justice at Yale, which is the home of the Yale Prison Education Initiative. Interfaith Action believes that opportunity grows and poverty recedes when people of faith commit themselves to making a difference. We mobilize and support thousands of volunteers from diverse faith and spiritual communities. Those volunteers engage in targeted work to support their neighbors' stability and economic mobility. Once each year, Interfaith Action's annual assembly brings to our community national leaders who introduce us to new thinking at the intersection of poverty and social justice. Tonight, we are thrilled to bring you cutting-edge thinkers and practitioners in the fields of prison reform, criminal justice reform, and reentry. We all have lots of questions and concerns, especially now. Who's in prison? What's the racial breakdown? We've heard of the poverty to prison pipeline, but what about the prison to poverty pipeline? What do our faith traditions tell us about who we should stand with and why? And what, if anything, should the faith community be doing to foster dignity, education, and economic mobility for Minnesotans behind bars? Those are some of the topics of tonight's discussion. And to start us off, it's my great privilege to introduce Minnesota's First Lady, Gwen Walz, who's passionate about this subject. First Lady Walz, thank you so much for being with here to welcome us all into this important conversation.
Thank you so much, and hello. How about all of these networks we're using to connect, right, during this COVID time? I'm so grateful for this opportunity and look forward to being able to be with all of you in person, I hope, sometime soon. And thank you for bringing this panel, this amazing panel together to look at sort of this holistic vision and share lifelong commitments to meaningful action and solutions. Because without that holistic vision, our solution and our action is not as orientated and focused as it can possibly be. I want to say on behalf of the governor and I that Interfaith Action is a trusted partner. You bring the community of faith together, communities of faith together, and find solutions to pressing issues. And we are so grateful to work with you, to have conversations with you, and look forward to that ongoing commitment. So that's from both myself and the governor. Tonight's topic is really one of those issues. We need a comprehensive understanding about the role poverty plays in mass incarceration, and the role education plays in justice reform. And panelists, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a hard time saying criminal justice reform. Because as an educator, I know that we often label things. And once we label them, that's how we begin to see them. I do not see people who are incarcerated as criminals. I see them as students. I see them as humans on a journey. And I'm not sure what systems that I've worked in. I worked in K-12 education for 29 years, resigning on December 31st, about 4 days before Tim was sworn in. I wonder what those systems do about those labels and about creating some of those labels that we might use. The governor and I are both teachers. Some of you might know that. And what I also believe is that good teachers are just really good learners. And so I have a lot to learn about this subject, about this whole fit, about this holistic idea. And so I want to make sure to welcome you and to let you know that I approach this with a learning lens, and so does the governor. That learning lens has led us to many places. Some of you may know we've traveled to China. Even our honeymoon, we took 60 students to China one day after our wedding. And it's kind of been like that ever since. A lifelong learner took us to Congress, and it also sparked our interest, and specifically my interest, in this very topic. I've had the humble privilege of working with the Bar Prison Initiative since 2012, and that's where I met Daniel Karpowitz. Daniel and I instantly connected because we shared an educational vision about student expectations and high expectations for all learners. We connected on that and have worked on that in Minnesota, actually, on several different occasions. But frankly, we couldn't quite crack the Minnesota nut. And I think that's the same hard nut that leads us to some of the issues that led to George Floyd and to some other real systemic issues that we've not yet addressed. Those are hard and challenging questions, right? But Daniel and I weren't quite successful, even though for a second chance Pell Grant, we had a congressional signature, a signature from Governor Dayton, and a second chance Pell application supported by the DOC. Something fell through. And you know what? I still don't know what that is or what that was. But Daniel and I did not give up. And I thought, how am I going to bring some change to Minnesota around this issue? How can I make this part of the conversation that is most important in my book? And all of you have already found ways to do that, but I was looking for my way. So I said to Tim, I think the only way we do that is to win the governor's race. So that's what we did. So here we are. Governor Walz is down the hall. Some of you may also know we're trying to get somewhere with state negotiations and some other topics. But he's down the hall, but that doesn't mean his heart is far from this issue either. This forum tonight is a step forward toward understanding, toward expanding college education with high and rigorous, like real education in our correctional institutions. And it's a step towards justice. Come on, let's do it. Let's take it. Let's ask the hard questions tonight. Let's listen to the experts on this panel. Let's learn together. I believe in the power of this interfaith community. So thank you again to the Interfaith Action for pulling together this insightful panel and sharing this time with me. I'm so excited to be with you.
Thank you so much for your words and for your work. We're so grateful for your leadership. Now it's my privilege to introduce Otis Zanders, who will serve as our moderator tonight, and to introduce his organization, Ujamaa Place. In January of 1977, Otis Zanders was finishing up his criminal justice major at Gustavus Adolphus College and had an internship at the Minnesota Department of Corrections. That began his 35-year career at the DOC. He served at locations across Minnesota and retired in 2012 as warden of the Minnesota Correctional Facility at Red Wing. Zanders retired, but he knew that he would be forever passionate about serving and solving the needs of at-risk young Black men. So in 2012, he began his second career as president and CEO of Ujamaa Place. Ujamaa opened its doors in 2010 to address the marginalization of African-American males in areas including education, housing, employment, training, and workforce development. Since 2010, these disparities have continued to escalate. In 2019, Minnesota had among the largest gaps in the country between whites and Blacks in terms of poverty rates, income, unemployment, home ownership, educational outcomes, placement in special education, and more. And young Black males are incarcerated at a rate that's dramatically higher than that of their white male counterparts, 10-1. Ujaama's mission is to address those disparities. Ujaama's work has brought success to more than 4,000 young African-American men who faced daunting barriers. Nationally, 75% of the people in this population return to prison. For those who complete Ujaama's program, that rate drops to 4%. Under Zanders, Ujaama Place transforms the lives of young marginalized Black men. Otis, thank you so much for being with us and leading this important discussion.
Well, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Again, thank you, Randy. Thank you for your kind words, of course, about myself, and especially about the work we're doing at Ujaama Place. So on behalf of all the staff and the board of directors, we appreciate you for inviting me to be the moderator and again, the chance to introduce Ujaama to many that maybe haven't heard about us and to present to others. So again, thank you. I'm very pleased this evening. We have a very exciting evening for those that have that tuned in to be on this webinar. We are here to give you a very exciting glimpse, an enlightening presentation, and discussion on the role of education for men and women who are incarcerated and the impact on their lives post-incarceration. Again, we know it's not a singular issue, but we understand the focus on education is very, very important one. A wise person once said, education is the key to unlocking the world as a passport to freedom. So the opportunity within our grasp today that we have simply titled Dignity, Education, Economic Mobility for Minnesotans Behind Bars. We have an exciting panel that we've assembled to present. And I'll start out with some brief introduction so we can get into the heart of this presentation. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. James Jeter. Mr. Jeter served 20 years at the Cheshire Correctional Facility in the state of Connecticut. He's an alum of the world-known Wesleyan Center for Prison Education that's located within the walls of Cheshire. He completed 20 credited college courses as a member of the Lifeless Program, where he worked with at-risk youth, raised money for local food banks, and the Hartford, Connecticut police chief on gun violence. His impressive resume did not stop there. It also included work with the Hartford's mayor's office, the governor's transition committee, the State Department of Justice Project Longevity Task Force, and the CEO of the Heartland Community Loan Fund, which became one of his employers upon release. After you hear from Mr. Jeter, you'll be hearing from Zelda Rowland. Zelda was worked with the student at Wesleyan Center for Prison Education at the Cheshire Correctional Institution in Connecticut. Her work inspired her to find and become the founder of the Yale Prison Education Initiative at Dwight Hall. And you heard about Dwight Hall a little bit in Randy's introduction. And that's located on Yale Center for Public Service and Social Justice. Zelda is she coordinates the Yale Prison Education Initiative, partnership and programming within the Department of Corrections in Connecticut, as well as relationships with other national prison education and criminal justice organizations. So again, I want to welcome Zelda to the panel. Our third and definitely not least panelist would be Mr. Daniel Kopowitz. As you heard earlier from the First Lady, that he is now in Minnesota now, serving as the Assistant Commissioner for Policy with the Minnesota Department of Corrections. And among his many duties there, he served as the interagency lead advisor to the Governor Walz on criminal justice here. He has a long history. I think it's earlier mentioned that he initiated and fostered college and prison partnerships between university and state governments and private philanthropy in more than a dozen states. Well known throughout a lot of you from his work at Bard College, where he served as the director of their prison initiative and a faculty member of political studies at Bard College as well. Daniel has worked with thousands of students who launched their successful academic lives in prison, as well as careers upon returning home. So we want to welcome Dan to the panel as well, and also to the state of Minnesota. We welcome you, sir. Without further ado, we're going to try to be attentive to time as best we can. So at this time, I would like to hear from our first panelist, Mr. James Jeter.
Good evening, everybody. So this is interesting. I'm a little perplexed in this discussion. Recently gave a TED talk, and I don't say that to like name drop TED talk or like that. I say it because I think I did a horrible job, right? And though some people seem to have found it very inspirational, someone very close to me said that I didn't appreciate your TED talk because I felt like I know you, and there's so much more you could have spoke to the issue, like the real root of the issue, and you didn't. So I'm here to talk to the experience of college and prison. Yet I feel like you can't isolate that from so much more that has preceded or what why we're here, right? You have to get to a place to talk about college and prison by having a prison population of 2+ million people, and it's rooted in something so much more than criminal justice or crime and punishment or whatever else we've called it throughout the years. And so I've only had the opportunity to talk to a interfaith community around these issues one time, and so I love it. I am a man of faith, a man who has a very deep rooted convictions in his faith. It's what drives me and moves me. To the point where I feel like feel a little like Jeremiah. He said, "You put your word in my heart, and it's like if I talk my mouth, it's like shot up like fire in my bones, right?" So, and I think way too often that Black people often have fire in their bones shut up, because when given opportunity, they hold back instead of speaking truth to power, whether it's the power, whether they're empowered in that power, or it's just truth in itself being out there and being itself a powerful thing. So I want to speak truth to this tonight, to kind of give it a lens that I think often might get watered down in perspectives, especially in communities of faith. And so I'm gonna give this through the lens that I view all of my life through my faith. I was at Target yesterday. My daughter has launched. I'm very proud of her. She's become very entrepreneurial over this pandemic, and she launched her own little delivery candy business where she has her little baskets, and she's and she loves it, and I drive her around. And I was at Target. They had a sale on some supplies, and I had on a shirt, and the shirt said, "Caution. I have PTSD from growing up and living as a Black man in America." And I wear this shirt quite often. I wear several shirts like this quite often, and I often forget I have this shirt on. And I was checking out, and when I was checking out, I wasn't paying attention to the person who was, processing me at the counter. But then I noticed in her voice that she was a little aggressive and really wanted to get me out the way. So she was rushing me through. Well, how many bags do you want? And I'm unloading the account. I'm like, oh, I don't know yet. I'm thinking 2, maybe 3. But let's go with 2 for now. And I needed 3. And I'm like, she's like, well, that's not enough. So how many bags do you need? So I'm finally turning and looking at her, wondering like, why is she so hostile? And I noticed that she's not looking at me. She's reading my shirt, and she's trying to see what the bottom of it says. And I was like, wow. And so I left the situation. I didn't respond to her. I just paid and left. But as I'm leaving, I'm thinking to myself, how interesting that my shirt, not me being aggressive, but just my shirt causes aggression in an individual towards me. And it made me think of the word caution, right? Because to them, it's interpreted as if they need to be cautious because I'm this aggressive, angry Black man who has PTSD and may go off. Though what we've noticed in our nation is that when people go off in public, they haven't had much melanin in their skin. And what we haven't, and so it's interesting because to me, how I interpret my shirt is as if you're a driver who is driving in a neighborhood that has a deaf child or a blind child. You see caution signs that say deaf child. right? Or caution sign that says blind child in neighborhood. And that caution sign is because you have the complete ability to harm this child. Not that this child possesses any danger to you, right? And so this is a matter of perception. And this is a perception that is embedded in faith. In faith. It isn't a perception that is codified in law. It is a deception that is cultural, historical, and at the root of it is faith. It is how we have taught faith, given faith, conformed through faith, and oppressed through faith. The Black image of America was first an immoral image. It was the conquering of the savage. At the end of slavery, it morphs into the criminal image. And it's a clean transition. And it's a transition that is embodied in the social conscious of America. So that when you see me, you see aggression. Whether I've been to prison, whether I work on Wall Street, whether I work in Walmart, you see aggression. It's the reason why police are able to use discretion and kill men, because they see aggression. Not that aggression lies there, but because they choose to see aggression because it's been imprinted into the fabric of who we are, and it starts with faith. And so we have to have a reckoning in faith with this. When Matthew came to understand his sin, he did the most equitable thing possible. He went and repaid everyone that he had stolen from, right? And so I point this out because when I think of faith and I think of scripture, I think less of religion, and I think a lot of the simple principles of how to live, of how to conduct oneself. I think of Matthew 48 when Christ says, and on that day, I will separate everyone into the goats and the sheep. And what he speaks specifically about isn't, one sexual orientation or their criminal background or their race or color. He says, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you came to see me. This is it. And when you say, when have I done this to you? And he says, whatever you do unto the least of mine, you do unto me. And so if we take no other approach to this as people of faith, as we are obligated to the least of his, we are indebted to the least of his as his, right? And whether, if that is your faith, if it's not your faith, I know that there are tenets and principles within all of the faiths that in most faiths that are along these lines where you have this debt, right? And so I start there, and then I move from there into what it means to be a citizen. What it means to be a citizen in this country is a very bifurcated thing, and it's structured to where you have a direct correlation between oppression and privilege, oppression and prosperity. And to claim citizenship is to say that I fall on one side. To say that I fall on one side, and I fall on one side categorically by my race. And it may not feel like it. It may not feel like I have the privilege, but it's so ingrained in the culture and it's so codified in policy that that's how it operates. You don't ever have to feel it. You operate through it. And so when we approach prison, I start with this because a lot of times when I'm called to speak outside of like college environments, I'll say, where there's these hungry, youthful minds or these open academic minds, I get called to speak because people want to hear a story. They want to hear a story of overcoming. They want to hear that it's not such a bad place. I had one person actually tell me, so would you say that prison was a good experience? Look how far you've come. And to that person, I say, I don't do downward comparisons. There's no response to, is prison a good place? There's no response to, did Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass come off of plantations? Was the plantation a good thing? Like, I can't respond to you because you've already set your mind to something. And so I start this because I don't want anyone here to set their mind to think that I'm going to tell you a story that praises what the possibilities are. I'm gonna tell you a very practical story about prison and college and prison, and how at the very base of dismantling a system, which I believe is our civic duty, especially if you have had any of the residual profits of being in this country and claiming to be a citizen. There's no place to start other than college and prison. College and prison, college, right? Because it's an oxymoron. It's like criminal justice. Criminal justice is an oxymoron because I don't think there could ever be anything criminal about justice, right? But college and prison is an oxymoron because these two places start from such a contradictory philosophy. College is structured solely on who you will become. And prison is solely structured on what you did in your past. You're locked into sometimes just one thing. That's who you are, sometimes for life, right? And so how do you in the first step, because we're not at a place where we're ready to say that, well, I understand that most crimes are a result of poverty. And I understand that poverty in this country, in Black and brown spaces, is a result of systemic oppression, horrible policies, horrible culture, genocide. Therefore, I suggest prisons really serve no purpose. And if we work on solving the poverty, we won't need prisons. We're not at that point to say release everybody. We're not there. So if we're not there, where are we? That's one honest conversation. Everybody say, where are we? Because that's going to determine exactly how productive we are as a society and as a state. So if you're talking about college and prison, involvement is the first step of investing in people who have been oppressed, people who have had their imaginations curtailed. And I say this not solely from my own experiences. I say this off of statistics. Having been released to prison, I've had the privilege of working in policy. And what I've learned is that you can literally look at how the imaginations of youth are capped through employment. So the HUD AFFH database has a statistic called it's an employment spectrum. It's based off it's an employment engagement spectrum, and what it determines is it shows a child's everyday interaction with levels of employment on a scale from 0 to 100. So a child who lives in a community where their friends' fathers are doctors or lawyers or small business owners, their engagement would be high in that scale. It'd be like in the 70s. And what that determines is where the child's expectation of employment are settled. When their everyday interactions are there, then this becomes the norm. If you look at most urban cities, the level of engagement is around 15 or 16. These are neighborhoods where the best job in the neighborhood is the Dollar Tree warehouse.
It seems that James is having an internet problem, and I'm sure he'll be rejoining us as soon as he possibly can. Otis, I wonder if while James is in that transition, if we maybe should
yes, we're right on
the program. Thanks.
Yes. Well, until we have James back to answer a couple of questions, let's keep it going with Zelda. Zelda, would you please give us some opening comments about you and your work, please?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Otis, for moderating. Thank you, Randy and Interfaith Action of Greater St. Paul. And it's always really nice to speak with James and Daniel, my mentor, beside me. So my name is Zelda Rowland. I'm the director, as Otis mentioned, of the Yale Prison Education Initiative at Dwight Hall. We're a program that offers access to Yale courses and other programming to incarcerated students in Connecticut, classes ranging from Latin to physics to art to English, reflecting the liberal arts mission of Yale. As one of our core principles, we treat students in prison with the same dignity and respect as on-campus students. We don't discriminate ever based on sentence length or type of conviction, which means that we're able to serve many students who've been denied by other programming, sometimes for many years. For our first 12-person English seminar in 2018, we received 600 applications, which demonstrates the profound and urgent need for programs like ours. But I want to begin what I have to say by saying this. The work that we do at YPEI is not done by me or by our staff, but the work is done by our students in prison. And I make a point of emphasizing to everyone on our staff and faculty that our physical office or remote office is always a satellite office that serves the central space of our program. That is the classroom space inside the prison, which is where the work we do happens. In recent months, of course, our understanding of what that space is has shifted profoundly. Students no longer have access to the classroom. They receive boxes of mail, legal pads, pens, pencils, course packs, books from us, and they complete their work inside their units or their cells. Nevertheless, this is the fabric of our program, the place where the university meets the carceral space. And in this work, as the director of our program, I take great care to always foreground the voices of those students inside, and most importantly, to be led by them. Tonight, I've been asked to provide a very brief 10-minute faith context for the work of college and prison. And I'm going to do my very best to make headway into this rather large question, mainly by asking questions, of course, rather than answering them. But before I get into that, the one thing that's really important to understand, and especially with the work of our program, is that what we seek to do is extend access to existing college opportunity, to existing college campuses, to the same type of rigorous higher education, liberal arts education that we might reserve for the most qualified applicants to, for example, an Ivy League university. Our work is to reimagine the mission of a college without ever changing the language of its mission at all. In the case of Yale, for example, I make a regular practice of reading and rereading our mission, italicizing in my head certain words. So the mission of our college is to seek exceptionally promising students of all backgrounds from across the nation and around the world, and to educate them through mental discipline and social experience to develop their intellectual, moral, civic, and creative capacities to the fullest. The aim of this education is the cultivation of citizens with a rich awareness of our heritage to lead and serve in every sphere of human activity. So to think about the faith context of higher education in prison, it's necessary to talk about the faith context and history of both higher education and of the prison. And I'm happy to point people to bibliographies on these subjects. And this is my first time in a Zoom webinar, but perhaps I'll post something like this on our website. But there are books that highlight the religious foundations of both of these types of institutions. The prison and the university are often closer in their roots than you might imagine, as well as books about the history of religious service and educational and evangelical programming in prisons, the roots of the prison system in religious thought, that along with racial capitalism and settler colonialism have led to where we are today, mass incarceration and the criminalization of Black lives. But it's funny because I have a quote from James that you just heard him say. So I'm going to tell you this quote that James says frequently and that I put right here above my computer and I look at a lot and dwell on. Prison is about who you were. College is about who you could be. So a lot of times in this work, people imagine what we are doing as a type of conversion, a type of transformation. Oh, James just got back. I should keep going though. Okay. As a type of transformation, facilitating a change in fundamental beliefs in an individual. So we input X and we receive a different product Y. I try vigorously and always to resist that logic in myself and others. And indeed, it really upsets me. I don't believe that we're working with sinners who need to repent and be made good. I don't believe in the redemptive quality of suffering. I do believe that we're serving people who have been failed systematically, profoundly by us. I believe that failure doesn't reflect on people like our students, but rather on us and our collective failure. And in many ways, I see any work of conversion or transformation not as the work of converting others, but in converting ourselves. And the us in that project that we are converting may also, in fact, be the university itself. But conversion does come up in these conversations, and sometimes not using the word conversion explicitly. It's a concept built into the very foundation, and indeed the name, of any Department of Corrections. Correcting something means that something was there before and that it will be replaced by something else beyond that. Conversion is a renouncement of something, and I'll add that conversion, of course, as a concept or practice doesn't have to be exclusively religious. And for the West, it wasn't even primarily religious for a certain time before Christianity. It can be a philosophical conversion. But this idea brings me back to the pairing of the university and the prison. And I think about these questions. What is the relationship of knowledge to conversion, or of truth to conversion? In order to know the truth, do you have to become a different person? In order to be a different person, do you need to know a different truth? So when I read you the university mission statement earlier, conversion isn't mentioned, of course, but these words are: educate, discipline, develop, a cultivation of citizens. So I wonder, I pose this question to you, in what ways is the project of the university itself also a project of a type of conversion? I wrestle with this idea because it is directly related to what James said and to what we think of as the transformative impact of a liberal arts education, even in prison. If prison is always confronting you with what you've done, college is always confronting you with what you haven't yet learned. And when we embark on the project of learning, are we renouncing a former version of ourselves? Or another way of asking this, does college simply serve as a venue in which to transmit knowledge? Or is there a project of personal conversion involved there? At the modern university, there's often a presumption of trying to transmit knowledge without having a conversionary aspect attached, like the idea of objective knowledge. And we've always been trying to invent new ways of transmitting knowledge that doesn't have this aspect of conversion. But to the project of college in prison, how could you possibly bring the transmission of knowledge into that project of changing people's souls, which is what prison is supposed to do, forget about what actually happens. And I was talking about this with Daniel Karpowitz, who will follow me. He reminded me that the conviction that people change is actually a defining principle of democracy. And he also quoted Cardinal Timothy Dolan from a past Easter message: God continues the act of creation through education. College changes people. Reading changes people. Reading with people changes you more. So let me finish on this brief note. I happen to be Jewish. Perhaps you know that conversion is kind of a different thing for Jews. People convert to Judaism with great difficulty. But in the 5 books of Moses, conversion is mostly talked about not as something that others do, but as something that we as a people have done and continue to do. Abraham turned away from his father's faith. The Jewish people were converted from slaves into free people, were given a new set of laws to abide by that had not existed before, had to renounce their former selves, were not allowed to enter the promised land. In Leviticus, we read, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And in this passage, sometimes the word stranger and elsewhere is translated to the word convert. I love it. I love it because it speaks to the work that we do, treating others as ourselves. But it also resonates with this idea. Prison is about who you were, college is about who you could be on a much larger scale. That even though we have different pasts, we can believe together in the possibility of a radical shared future of equal citizenship. So with that, I will pass on to Daniel, or no, back to James. Someone tell me.
Thank you so much, Zelda. James, welcome back. What we'd like to do is maybe continue to get to hear from each of the panelists, and we'll circle back with James and all of you on the questions. So with that, I would like to encourage all of the attendees that if you do have questions, please submit them into the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Our panel is excited about hearing from you as well. So this is a very interactive evening. So without further ado, again, welcome back, James, and I'd like for us to hear from Daniel right now.
Thank you, Otis. It's a pleasure to be working with you all and being a part of this contribution. Thank you to everyone that in this assembly for making this happen. I'd also like to actually begin by responding to something that I think a really challenging question that James put before us. You know, this paradox of the relationship between the college and the prison and how radically different they seem to be in their orientations, either to change or to the past and the future. And I'll do that by, you know, thinking of an anecdote, that sharing a story that the First Lady actually reminded me of when she said that, you know, she thinks a great teacher is just a very good learner. And I think we could add to that great students are great teachers. I'm thinking about one of the many remarkable students I've known who we met in a circle of an orientation in the first day of classes, and everybody was invited to explain, you know, what brought them to that circle, to that paradoxical space of the college inside the prison. And this young man spoke when the movement of the circle came around to him, and he said, you know, I've been in here for a number of years, and I found myself getting comfortable in this horrible place, this monstrous place. And I found myself getting comfortable. And I looked around for the fastest way to make myself uncomfortable here again. And my eyes settled on the college. And I said, I've got to get in there and get uncomfortable again. And I think that's an example of a person who was a great student and was teaching from his first day as a student as a result, but also as a kind of response to James's challenge that he puts before us. You know, let's say we're in a moment where different modes of abolition seem to be present in a way that they may not have been for many years in American popular awareness. And what does that mean to make a prison system better in a moment where the emancipatory and aspirations are so high? Doesn't that seem to be taking a bad system or a broken system and making it seem somewhat better, making it look like we are reforming something that needs far more than tinkering? And I go back to the student's comment because we do have to pose, I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about the status quo of our ambitions in the administration to build an entirely new generation of relationships between Minnesota's anchor institutions of higher education and men and women who are currently incarcerated and are students or on the cusp of becoming students in the months and semesters ahead. And that work of transforming, to some degree possible, prison space and time into college and university space and time. By, you know, going back to that question, how do we do that while remaining uncomfortable? And making the college uncomfortable, and I'd say more importantly, and I'm on tenterhooks a little bit thinking about Warden Zander here and how this will be received, but in making the prison uncomfortable. We cannot have an encounter between Minnesota's colleges and universities in which they adapt themselves to the prison, to Red Wing or Stillwater or Shakopee. We have to proceed in a way in which the presence of students and the presence of the university make the prison uncomfortable, and the prison has to adapt. The prison has to change. So I think for me, as I sort of think about the challenge that James, one of the challenges he put before us is we have metrics. The Walls is our data-driven administration. We are all obligated to produce data, to analyze data, to make it transparent, to share it with those whom we serve. And I think one of those is this prison system, as we grow college or university inside Minnesota's prisons, is this prison system getting smaller? We need a inverse relationship between the growth of higher education and prison and the shrinking of the prisons themselves. And at the same time, we need those prisons to have to be made uncomfortable. Our staff, our teachers, our security apparatus, our visiting rules, our traffic and books and papers and ideas need to respond to the challenges set before it by the forward-looking college or university and its students. So that's a bridge for me from, I think, one of the challenges that James laid before us, and maybe some themes that have threaded through the conversation. I'll take my remaining time. I have been asked to make a comment about mass incarceration in Minnesota. I'll try to do that briefly. Where is Minnesota's place in American mass incarceration? Many of us on the call may be aware that Minnesota has a relatively is on the bottom 5 of states in the United States today in the rate of incarceration. So you might think, wow, Minnesota is not a mass incarceration state because we're in the bottom 5. That's misleading profoundly for 2 reasons. The first reason is when we say we're at the least bad of the worst country in the world, when we say that we're at the least bad moment of a country that has never incarcerated in its history, in our own history, at the intensity and rate that we do, that doesn't get you out of being in mass incarceration. That gets you into being, on the low end of the mass incarceration society that we produced. And I'll put that in some very concrete context. I was in a conversation with some very important folks not long ago, where under COVID, under the pandemic, one of the things we were pleased with was the low number of people in prison in Minnesota, because the inputs have been in decline. We can speak more about that. Means the inputs have been slowed down under COVID. Inputs to the prison system. Fewer people are being incarcerated. And as a result, the numbers are down in the system. We're at 7,800 today is the population of people in prison in Minnesota. And the thought was, that's putting us into a great place. We haven't been at that low a number in a long time. And everybody comes up with their own number. The 2000s, the 1980s, the 1970s, the 1960s. And I went back to the data, and I asked myself, how many people were in prison in Minnesota when I was my son's age? My son is 15. How many people were in prison in Minnesota in 1985? So that this number that we're so low at today, thanks to a deadly virus that's impacting highly incarcerated communities more intensely than any other Minnesotans. What's the number that we're at? How many people were in prison in Minnesota in 1985? Everyone take a moment and take a guess. 2,500. There were 2,500 total prison population in Minnesota in 1985. It's not that long ago, I guess is what I mean to underscore that. So the second reason it's wrong to be pleased with our relationship to mass incarceration in Minnesota is that the mass in mass incarceration is not a neutral demographic term. It's not a rate it's not a mill rate per 100,000. It's about demographic inequality. The term mass in social science, mass incarceration, is about its disparate impact on people of color. It is about its disparate impact on Indigenous and Native American communities. It is about its disparate impact on Black Americans. And that's built into the mass. And when you look at us as a state, Minnesota, that way, we are stars, we are standouts on mass incarceration. And that, by the way, and here's something just to ponder in the future, that's typical of relatively low rate incarceration states are have the most intensified and disparate impacts on their racialized citizens. The lower the rate of the rate of incarceration, typically the more racialized the problem. Wow, that's fascinating. So as has been alluded to in the past, these numbers are a little out of alignment with the post-COVID moment that we are struggling through. But as I think an earlier speaker mentioned, I think it was Randy, we are at 10 times the rate of incarceration comparative to whites for Black Minnesotans. That is almost 15% for Indigenous and Native Americans. So for those reasons, that's one way of understanding Minnesota's relationship to mass incarceration. And the other is to remind ourselves, and I'll introduce this term maybe for some of us, is that we are a mass supervision state. One of the ways we have purchased a relatively modest rate of mass incarceration in Minnesota is through mass supervision. And, Otis, maybe you could speak to that, when we return, because if we have that moment, or that would be really kind of great to open that. But that is our flip side of that 7,000 people in prison as the 90,000 people on probation supervision. These extraordinary numbers. And what is their relationship to the prison system? And this is something Otis will be deeply familiar with: the churn, the warehousing, the short-term returns, the technical release violation returns, the bench of the prison system. I will take a moment. How much time, Otis or Randy? Do I have a few minutes? Sorry, I should be tracking this myself. I think I may be out of time. Am I out of time? Yeah. So maybe what I can do is in the Q&A, respond if people are interested. I can use some of the Q&A time later to introduce the state of play for the building out of a new generation of college and prison, or what I will call partnerships between Minnesota's universities and anchor institutions of higher education and people who are currently in prison who want to matriculate at those universities. So I'll speak to that more in a Q&A time, if that's of interest, if we're part of the venue. So thanks very much, Otis and James and Zelda.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Daniel. Not only to Daniel, but to Zelda as well as James. I want to appreciate you all doing your best to stay within the time constraints. Don't blame it on me. It was Randy. Had these short periods of time. But it is a very, very interesting topic. And I think each of you have presented yourselves in a way that we see in the chat box fill up with questions. As we open up to questions, again, just want to encourage people to fill in your questions. And if we don't get an answer here, I'm sure that Interfaith will find a way to respond back to you. It's a very lively topic. But James, before you got frozen out for a moment, I had asked a question I'd like to maybe put back to you, sir. And that question was, how would your life be different now if you hadn't been able to do college in prison?
I don't. So it's a loaded question, because if you mean different from a quality standpoint or a standpoint of access to the academic world, I'm not sure.
I guess the question is actually, with college behind you, academic success, how did that ease your transition back into society?
Yeah. Okay. So it's still a loaded question though. I'm gonna tell you why, right? Because um, I think that I've had so much favor in uh what has been an exceptional transition, not without hurdles, but exceptional in the state of Connecticut from an opportunity standpoint. Because, the honest truth is that a lot of guys who I know that go through college and prison programs, they run into like so many immediate hurdles that I didn't have to run into. So it hasn't made their transition necessarily any easier. And the reason why is this, is that college and prison, or even the thought of reform, and I'm not a reformist. I don't believe you can. It's not. I don't believe Babylon can only be Babylon, right? I don't. So I'm not a reformist. However, this is all nuanced. So outside of it's nuanced with all of us, because we're learning what college is all over again, right? And I think at the initial start of college and prison, no one had the thought process of what college was anymore. Though they were all college professors and administration, they knew the process of education, but college is so much more than education. College has a transition built into it all its own. When your kids come in, they have so many resources to make sure that this transition is successful. And when they're leaving, they have a ton of resources, right? So we address transition on both sides of this interaction when we're talking about college students on main campuses. But from a large part, that part of it hadn't been addressed by anyone because it's so nuanced. And in the prison setting, and from a standpoint of understanding that, well, there's a whole new set of hurdles that come with this transition. And so, like, I was in a program that, they weren't prepared to cross that. They didn't have the thought process on that yet. So I didn't come home with like complete access and help from that program or even open doors. Like my relationship with Harvard Community Loan Fund came from the Lifers program. What I came home with from college and prison was relationships, and those helped me. They stabilized me in a lot. Daniel and Zelda, they snuck me out of the halfway house and took me to get some real food. And this was like my first month home. And so, the relationships that I had formed in there were what anchored me. And I think it's dope to have that organic experience. But I think what Minnesota has the unique opportunity with Daniel's just wealth of knowledge and experience, and even from his successes as much as his program's failures, because all programs have failures, right? And so getting to look at that, you have such a rich starting place of saying like, well, we can build in what transitions looks like, and more so not just from like a structural point, but really as a faith community from a very personal point of saying that I'm willing to put my credibility out there, right, on the behalf of these men and women. Because one of the hurdles in coming home is that, yeah, I can have an education. Doesn't mean anybody wants to hire me. And when I do get hired, one of the hurdles I ran into was, we've never had someone that can bring or do what you do. You don't have a degree, so we can't pay you. Or, you first out of prison, let's take it slow. Let's start you off here. I need money at the beginning, more than anybody in this office at this point, right? And so you run into a lot of different hurdles because no one's willing to say, no, this person, forget prison, this person has a skill set wherever it is. And I believe in this person. So there are so many different ways that everyone can contribute. And it's going to take all of that. It takes all of that to undo what is.
Thank you so much, Sam. I would like to take advantage of Zelda's time with us. It's very fascinating reading your bio, Zelda, primarily by going inside and working with offenders, and to the point that you come out and start a program to have the continuous work there. For the people that's on this call, what challenges do we face starting a strong college and prison program in Minnesota?
Oh, that question took a turn in a direction I didn't see. you're in good hands with Daniel, who really helped me at every step of the way when I was starting this program. There have been many challenges here that I think maybe are unique to what we're trying to do here at Yale and in New Haven, which have a difficult relationship with each other as a city and a college. This has been a massive lobbying campaign here, where for the first 2 years of doing this work, it was really about cultivating support from all across the university. I always tell people that coming into this, I thought, you know, the Department of Corrections would be the difficult sell. The Department of Corrections was nothing. They, you know, I met with the commission, the first time I met with the commissioner 6 years ago, 2 commissioners ago now, I said to him, you know, I've been working with this program at Wesleyan. These are the best students I've ever seen. You know, I want to do something like this with Yale. And our commissioner stopped me and said, I will do whatever it takes to get this program in our prison. You tell me who I have to meet with. I will come down anytime you want. And that was Scott Semple, Commissioner Semple in Connecticut. We had a very sympathetic commissioner following, Commissioner Cook, who just left. The prison was never the problem. The problem was convincing, and has continued to be, convincing Yale of the worthiness of this endeavor, of the value of seeing incarcerated students as already existing in that mission statement that I read. And also in creating the networks on the campus that we need in order to sustain a full, robust program, right? With class where we can not just offer English classes every year, but offer a physics class, offer different disciplines that are going to eventually contribute to a real transferable degree, right? I would defer to Daniel on what the specific challenges of Minnesota are, but I just heard from your first lady, and I know Daniel, so I can tell you they're going to be different. But what a team!
Great, thank you, Zelda. And to Dan, I must admit that we do have a reoccurring question that's coming up over and over again, Daniel. And it's many people want you to speak directly to what kind of programs we have here in Minnesota and what you want to help create. We'd like to be specific, like your goals for this program here.
Great. So that is a long conversation. Fortunately, a long conversation. So I'll try to do an overview. The first thing I will say is that it speaks, I think, to this theme that Zelda touches on, and again back to some issues that James raised. Namely, I would encourage this community to think of this as not a feature of criminal justice reform in Minnesota. This is not a criminal justice project. This is a higher education project. This is a terrible shortcoming of the Minnesota State University system. This is a grievous failing of the University of Minnesota and its 5 campuses. This is a problem of how Minnesota funds and identifies who's eligible and ineligible for Minnesota state grants. This is the fact that it is so difficult and so challenging and so rare for extremely desirous and often acutely talented students in prison to be able to enroll in Minnesota's colleges and prisons. Again, that is not primarily a failing or a function of the prison system at Stillwater or Chocopee, as Zelda alluded to, or to wardens like Warden Zander, who would welcome and bend over backwards to make this as an opportunity. This is a failing of Minnesota State's education system. This is a failure of Minnesota to make this even seen. It's invisible. Nobody's even knew it was a problem. So that's the first thing I would say in terms of what's the state at play, is that this is something, and as a result of choices this administration has made and the governor and the first lady have made, we have a commissioner of higher education who has foregrounded this as a matter of the Office of Higher Education. So this is not about facility leadership. This is about Minnesota higher education. That's really important in terms of the state of play. Just that first principle, that this is about inclusive excellence and remediating some of the terrible shortfalls in education in Minnesota more than it is. And that takes us right away out of corrections. That takes us right away out of fixing individuals who need fixing or converting people who need to learn. I mean, I won't even tell you the phrase that I've heard in the past. It's exasperating. Middle-class values is actually the phrase. It's fixing this terrible sequence of failures in the Minnesota education and higher educational system. So that's the state of play. We have that. That's a win that comes with the Walz administration. We have the University of Minnesota has stepped forward. The leadership at Minnesota State Metropolitan University has stepped forward. The leadership of multiple two-year colleges in the system has stepped forward. So there's a lot to talk about in terms of that state of play. We have a bridging program that is a COVID bridge during COVID to get through that while we can't have faculty coming and going from the facilities right now. For those of you whose hermeneutical training in your religious traditions brought you through Latin a little bit, my son has some of that training. The code word for this Open University project during COVID is called Willis Corona Universitatis. I will not translate that into English. There may be a rule against that in this assembly of using foul language of that kind. It's a way of saying no to COVID and starting this new generation of higher education. We are commandeering with facility leadership the TV systems throughout this prison system. We're launching our first 3 credit-bearing TV-launched new generation of college classes. They are open to the widest and possible number and inclusivity of students who are currently incarcerated. And we have 3 extraordinary faculty teaching with Metro State University to do this with the DOC. We're teaching American government and politics with a professor, a political scientist from Morehouse College, a historically Black powerhouse college in Atlanta, Georgia. We have a old colleague of Zelda's and James's from Yale, who's now at Harvard teaching the sociology of work. And we have the head of the undergraduate program in epidemiology at the U teaching an intro to epidemiology. This is to women and men across the prison system starting in a week or two. We're commandeering the JPay system for email and televisions until we can get live faculty and live classrooms up and running at all of those facilities as well. So that's a little bit of the state of play in terms of this Open University, or in Latin, I think it's roughly translated from the Latin as FU COVID University project that we're doing this summer. And then we have this bridge towards these anchor institutions, Minnesota State Metro, maybe other 4 years, the U. And I would say, if I were to, prior to there being real volunteer opportunities, I would say the key 2 things I would encourage people to think about or be aware of that I would advocate on behalf of is, number 1, thinking of this as an initiative, a comprehensive initiative coming out of Minnesota's higher education and educational culture, first and foremost, to avoid the paradoxes that James identifies as pitfalls. And second of all, we have gaps legislatively in who can't be funded, who can't be included as a student in a state that does extraordinarily well funding students. And we've created shortfalls, and that we can't sit around and wait for the REAL Act to come out of Congress. And we should be thinking about that now. Again, not as a criminal justice reform item, but as a Minnesota higher education priority. So lots to talk about that, but I'll spare you the.
All right, excellent.
Too much. Thanks, Otis.
I do like you shifting the narrative or the thought from being a criminal justice initiative, but to a higher education one. And of course, as we know, that thought is going to be a process, like turning the Titanic a little bit. So what do we say to people that will argue back that a college education should be available to everyone? And why should we start with prisoners? And James or Daniel, please.
I've been working on this question for about 20 years now. I'm happy to give it a shot, but I'd like to defer to James. James, do you want to respond to this first, or you want me to take a quick shot?
The question is, why should college be offered to people in prison?
Yes, why should we start there with free education? Yes.
So I when Zelda had texted me and said the screen froze after you said Dollar Tree. And so the whole purpose of me saying Dollar Tree was that No, specifically for, I think this is right. This is exactly what I wanted to, what I was trying to get to, right? Is that when you think about these being the best jobs and what this engagement produces, it limits the imagination on creativity, on who I can become, right? It locks you in, and when you're locked in that type of manner, whether consciously or subconsciously, you know, any reasonable thinking person looks at their options. And when you're in poverty and this is your ceiling, when your ceiling is to come home poor at the end of the week, to not say that I've worked, to say that I've worked and I still might not have enough to pay the bills, to reject that isn't criminal. It's common sense. So a lot of kids wind up in the streets. And what I've heard a lot of people say, who not men and women who have been in college prison programs, specifically around prison reform, and I'm only just for this one point, is that when it comes to crime, a lot of the defenses, the first people do is they protect their family. They say, I come from a good home, right? When they talk about places, say, my parents, this is how they raised me. And I hate that. I hate that thought process, because no one is questioning like how white collar criminals were raised when they're sitting in Club Fed and they've, you know, embezzled $500 million. We talk about their brilliance. They're criminal, we talk about their brilliance, right? When we start here in these communities that are limited like this, this is how you build the prison population. It's how you build your prison population. It's also the same manner of how you maintain a pseudo middle class, your staff, right? And so we talk about free education. To me, education is not free. It's well paid for. It's very well paid for. It exists in residuals that benefit so many people in your state that you're, to me, you're indebted. You're indebted. You're indebted to do this at no cost. And what college offers, what you're directly injecting into the system is the expansion of their imaginations again. And you can't put a price on that. One thing college didn't give me my capacity. It gave me a toolbox that I didn't have. There isn't a college campus in this country or in this world that I don't believe I can't go on and find success. The interaction gave me that.
Thank you. Daniel, would you like to give us a response?
Yeah, very briefly, just to support what James had mentioned, speaking just there too, and I think he put some very challenging and critically important kind of fundamental analysis in front of us there. I even agree with that. I would also add it in some ways almost less ambitious way. We've just participated in a fabulous experiment in answer to this question. Prior to 1994, everybody who was incarcerated in America was eligible for Pell funding. And out of resentment and grievance, that was taken away by the United States Congress. And people why should, some people who are working hard, quote unquote, be funded and people in prison also be funded? Well, we tried that. We tried a division and we were conquered. We took Pell away from the men and women who were in prison. And do you think college got cheaper for the rest of us since 1994? Do you think this middle class has found it easier to make tuition? We all know what's happened to tuition since 1994, and we took it away from our poorest and most vulnerable. We all know what's happened to college indebtedness in households since 1994, when we took it away from the poorest and the most vulnerable. This is what that politics leads to. Right now, today, the attack on international students, 1.5 million people who are students in our universities facing ICE deportation this week. That's where that politics leads us. So I'm suggesting to all of us who are striving to make our tuition payments that it is all of us or none, and that we have tried that experiment and seen where it's brought us to as a country right here and right now. That's why people in prison have to get those Pell Grants or those MSG grants. And I'd say, I do want to say that, the support we've gotten out of the Chancellor's office and of the leadership of the state universities to date has really been outstanding. And I'm optimistic about where that will go. So that's a less radical and fundamental thing than what I think what James has offered, but I think it supplements. I don't think it's, I think it's an addition.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Originally, Daniel, you used the word that I very accurate of mass supervision, how we use the community-based programs in lieu of prison a lot. The question came up, since we have so many people on supervised release or under supervision, should we offer college level program to that population as well?
We can, and you could say, quote unquote, that we do. So we do have Minnesota State University campuses upon which people who have had a period of time in a correctional facility are thriving. They're matriculating, they're studying, they're graduating. So again, it's invisible. And there's one thing about that invisibility that's great. That's an anonymity, that's a normalization, that's a pride in all sorts of areas of one's life. So I wouldn't want to disrupt that. But it's also an invisibility about what, in fact, how people are succeeding, how people are overcoming obstacles, and how our campuses, this kind of extraordinary infrastructure we have of public university campuses in Minnesota, is actually serving an enormously remediating and restorative role, and is part of that process of the residuals that James is talking about. I think it is happening. And so it's just, we can be much more intentional about that. And what we can do is, one of the things we know that our leading criminologist in the state who works in the DOC will tell us is it doesn't matter what the program is inside a prison, as long as there's continuity. It's the continuity that's extraordinary. And so it's that ability, James alluded to a lot of the challenges here, but also some of the real power is, you start that matriculation before you leave. Your alma mater before you go home is a big deal. And we ought to name it as such. So I would see that as a continuum. We are launching in COVID with a private philanthropy, a reentry college initiative. And we're going to put tablets and books and faculty relationships into the hands of the people at the halfway house. Maybe we'll also get out to a good meal, as James suggested, and sort of build that in. That's critically important. Getting there to around that table and to break bread together. But we are doing that, and that will be starting later this summer and early this fall. And if people are interested, I could talk more about that. We have a halfway house on the Twin Cities camp, the main campus on the West Bank, a men's work release location. It's on the campus of the main campus, and there's never been a higher education partnership. That's crazy. We have one in Ramsey County for women. There's never been a relationship with Metro or with St. Paul Tech. That's crazy. So we have some things right at our fingertips, and there are opportunities to be supportive of that if folks want to double back with Randy and her team and myself later on.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you all. And out of respect for time, I'm going to probably have to cut the questions off at this point. I'm seeing just our attendees, just tons of great questions. And I can assure you that I want to thank Kathy Graves, who's been on this planning committee, for making sure all of your questions are visible for me to see. But for sake of time, we're going to cut off now and just give me a chance to thank each of our panelists, Mr. Jeter, Zelda, and also Daniel. And if I make a shameless plug, if you haven't watched the PBS documentary on education behind bars, that was produced by Kevin Burns, I encourage you to do so. It featured the outstanding work of Dan at Bard College, just some outstanding award-winning work, so I encourage you to look at that. There we go, college and prison there. Thank you so much. That's this from Daniel Capwitz. Oh, Daniel, welcome to the Twin Cities, my friend.
That's a classic right there. That's thanks to Zelda and my mom for putting it out there. Thanks, Otis. Yeah.
Looking forward to a cup of coffee with you as well. Again,
I can't wait.
Thank you as well. And at that, I want to pass back off to Randy. Thank you so much, Randy, for inviting me to moderate this discussion, and looking forward to seeing you as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Daniel, I want to tell you, Interfaith Action bought a copy too of the book. Daniel's book is great. I want to conclude first by saying what a great annual assembly, because the point is to challenge our thinking, to give us new thinking. Even the way we talk has been reframed by this discussion. From criminal justice to an education issue, it's wonderful. and from should college be free to the debt that we owe to people who go through the educational system and then contribute to our society. So I was learning the whole time. My guess is people have stayed with us the whole time. So thank you. Thank you to Otis for moderating. Thank you, James. Thank you, Zelda. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you to everyone who's on this call for being here with us tonight. Thank you to our team for doing such a great job on the back end of tech. Now, it's my job to tell you that resources that got mentioned tonight, Zelda's resources, Daniel's book, the Ken Burns PBS special, we will send out a resource list with all of that. And all of the fabulous questions that are in the chat that we couldn't answer, we're gonna see if these panelists will help us by giving us a sentence or two to each one, and then we'll publish it as a blog post. So we'll give it our best shot. We know they're very busy. We need your support in so many ways. And the first is around volunteer opportunities. Soon, by September, I think we'll be offering volunteer opportunities in restorative justice circles to support Ramsey County Attorney John Choi's efforts to divert young people away from the criminal justice system into community-based restorative justice circles instead. We need faith community volunteers to come in to get the numbers we need to divert as many people as he'd like. So watch our website and our communications about that. Second, we hope that within a year, we've been talking to Daniel about this, we hope that within a year, we'll be able to offer volunteer opportunities in the college and prison work that Daniel started talking about tonight and in his reentry college program. And so we're gonna stay in close contact, and as those details become available, we'll let you know. And in the meantime, if you wish, you may also support the work you heard about tonight through financial contributions, and any donations you make tonight will be split 3 ways between Interfaith Action, the Yale Prison Education Initiative, and Ujamaa Place. You can give online at interfaithaction.org/donate. We want to thank all the sponsors of this event who you saw on the slide in the beginning for your generous support. And now, in conclusion, Interfaith Action board member, Pastor Javen Swanson of Gloria Dei Lutheran Church will lead us in a closing prayer.
I'm happy to. Thank you, panelists, for a fantastic program tonight. And thank you, Randy, and all of the staff at Interfaith Action for all the hard work that went into making this happen tonight. Let us pray. God, who we call by many names, Spirit of justice and love, we give you thanks for enlivening our gathering tonight and for the wonders of technology, imperfect as it is sometimes, that makes it possible for us to be together. We give you thanks for Otis, for James, for Zelda, and for Daniel, whose work is creating opportunity and lifting people out of poverty, and who have encouraged and inspired us this evening. Continue to bless their work and to bless the work of Interfaith Action. Renew our efforts to relieve the effects of poverty and address its causes so that we might build a more just, safe, equitable, and livable greater St. Paul for all. May we all be swept up in your unfolding work of celebrating human dignity, sowing the seeds of hope, and repairing the world. Amen.